This is 106.7, Wilmington's Big Talker, and my name is Paul Vallone. I'd like to welcome you to Guns, Politics, and Freedom, where each Sunday at 5 p.m., as part of the Sunday Night Political Power Block, we give you the ammunition to better defend your gun rights. In case you aren't familiar with me, I direct Grassroots North Carolina, or GRNC, since 1994, our state's most effective gun rights organization. As its director, I was involved in drafting and passing our original concealed handgun law. Since then, GRNC has gone on to engineer passage of concealed handgun reciprocity, our purchase permit bypass, Castle Doctrine and Stand Your Ground, the expansion of concealed carry to state and municipal parks, restaurants, public assemblies, educational properties, and much more. Grassroots North Carolina is exactly what the name implies, a grassroots collection of people from all walks of life who share a common concern that our constitutionally guaranteed freedoms are being eroded. Check us out at grnc.org. That's grnc.org. In nearly 2.5 decades of gun rights activism, one of the things I've learned is that if you want to make a leftist truly squeal, do to them exactly what they do to you. That's why my library includes not only Saul Alinsky's Rules for Radicals, but also tomes on organizing for social change, the Activist's Handbook, and other how-to guides on imposing socialism on those around you. I've made art out of using their own tactics against them. Perhaps unwittingly, my good friend Dr. John Lott has now apparently adopted that very same tactic. You might know Dr. Lott as the author of More Guns, Less Crime, and as the head of the Crime Prevention Research Center, which debunks many of the biased anti-gun studies promulgated by alleged academics who are in fact paid shills for Michael Bloomberg. Now, Lott is a true academician, and as such, isn't really known for an ironic sense of humor. So imagine my surprise when Dr. Lott, in his presentation to Donald Trump's Presidential Advisory Commission on Election Integrity, proposed something so rich in irony that the left is still screaming. You know the Advisory Commission I'm talking about, right? It's the one with Trump that Trump called after citing evidence of widespread voter fraud, which the media now routinely dismiss as Trump's false allegations. Never mind that in New Hampshire, where the hearings were held, Kansas Secretary of State Chris Kobach, the vice chairman of the commission, cited thousands of cases of voters using out-of-state driver's licenses as ID in an election in which Republican Senate incumbent Kelly Ayotte was narrowly defeated. No, never mind all that. Back to John Lott. Using his typical statistical methodology, Lott first set about testing the classic whine of the left that voter ID laws disenfranchise minority voters by suppressing voter turnout. After all, we hear lots of theoretical arguments on both sides, but actually very few facts. Well, surprise, surprise, surprise. As it turns out, the implementation of voter ID laws in states which adopted them had no negative impact on voter turnout for various demographic groups, including minority males and females. But it was Lott's next proposal that truly caused the left to become unhinged. Please allow me to use his own words from a Chicago Tribune editorial. And I quote, "Republicans worry about voter fraud. Democrats claim that Republicans are just imagining things. But in testimony Tuesday before the Presidential Advisory Commission on Election Integrity, I will suggest a simple solution that can make both parties happy. Apply the background check system for gun purchases to voting. Democrats have long lauded background checks on gun purchases as simple, accurate, and in complete harmony with the Second Amendment right to own guns. Senate Minority Leader Chuck Schumer, D. New York, has bragged that the checks make our communities and neighborhoods safer without in any way abridging rights or threatening a legitimate part of the American heritage. Now, if Democrats really believe that the National Instant Criminal Background Check System doesn't interfere in any way with people's constitutional rights to own a gun, doesn't it follow that the same system would not constitute an infringement on people's right to vote? This would give Republicans a system for stopping vote fraud and Democrats a system that they have already vigorously endorsed. The NICS system doesn't just determine if potential gun buyers have criminal histories. It also checks whether a person is in this country illegally, has a non-immigrant visa, or has renounced his citizenship. Such people are not allowed to vote. The system doesn't currently flag people who are an immigrant on immigrant visas, but that could be added to the system. In 34 states, felons are not able to vote immediately upon release. The background check system would detect those too. So there you have it. The response has been, a hilarious exercise in the hypocrisy for which the left has become so infamous. First came the ad hominem attacks. After all, if you can't attack the message, then kill the messenger. Despite having written a paper on voter fraud and the differential impact of different types of voting regulations on voters of different ages and races, the Washington Post dismissed Lott's work as, quote, not critical and, quote, patently absurd, further maligning his work by saying he is not otherwise known for work on elections or voting. Never mind that his paper comprised a sophisticated multi-regression analysis of the issues, something voter ID opponents have yet, to my knowledge, been able to cite. Never mind that Lott's background isn't in guns. He is, after all, by training an economist. Now, the study of economics being, and I quote, a social science concerned chiefly with the description and analysis of the production, distribution, and consumption of goods and services. Never mind that as an economist, Lott was the former chief economist for the United States Sentencing Commission. Never mind that Lott has held positions in law and economics at Yale Law School, Stanford, UCLA, the Wharton Business School, Texas A&M University, and Rice University. And never mind that, as usual, the left doesn't bother to tell you why Lott's work is, and I quote, not credible. You, the unwashed, probably wouldn't understand that anyways. Nope, the former chief economist of the United States Sentencing Commission is simply not credible. Then, of course, we have the usual smarter-than-thou snarkiness of the left, as evidenced by the Kansas City Star, which said, and I quote, the voting commission for which Kansas Secretary of State Chris Kobach serves as vice chair is considering a proposal to subject voters to the same background checks as gun owners, because ballots are at least as scary as bullets. Well, as they say, yes, Virginia, there is a Santa Claus. No, Virginia, ballots aren't at least as scary as bullets. When it comes to snuffing out freedom, ballots are far scarier than bullets. But the one I loved was the accusation that Lott is pushing use of a background check system he correctly notes has failed for gun purchases. After all, if it doesn't work for gun purchases, how could it work for voting? This argument ignores one glaring fact. The National Instant Check System fails to stop criminals from getting guns because criminals don't buy guns from gun dealers. They steal them or get them on the street. But you can't vote on the street. The only place to cast a ballot is from a government-run polling place. Nice try, fellas. But here is the best part, the one that causes me to ask if my deadpan serious academic friend John Lott isn't finally developing an ironic sense of humor. Listen to the objections of the media on the impact of using gun purchase background checks for voting, straight from the mouth of the Washington Post. Except first, we're going to take a break. My name is Paul Vallone, and you have been listening to Wilmington's Big Talker, wilmingtonbigtalker.com. Our show is Guns, Politics, and Freedom. And in just a moment, we will come back with more about the gun control advocates who want to saddle you with nightmare bureaucracy of universal background checks, but consider such checks far too high a hurdle to prevent illegal aliens from voting. So join us in just a moment as we resume Guns, Politics, and Freedom. My name is Paul Vallone, and you are listening to Guns, Politics, and Freedom today on Wilmington's Big Talker 106.7, wilmingtonbigtalker.com. Today we are talking about how gun control advocates who want to saddle you with nightmare bureaucracy of universal background checks consider such checks far too high a hurdle for the illegal aliens who want to vote. Now, before our break, we were discussing how the left's response to the proposal by Dr. John Lott to the Trump Commission on Voter Integrity to use the National Instant Check system used for gun purchase background checks and apply it to the voting process. And how, of course, that has caused the left to come unhinged. First came the ad hominem attacks. As I said, if you can't kill the message, kill the messenger. And so they pronounced him as not credible, patently absurd, didn't have any background, never mind that he was the chief economist for the United States Sentencing Commission, or that he's got academic credentials from a variety of highly ranked institutions. Never mind that he did sophisticated multi-regression analysis of voter laws. None of these things, of course, make any difference to the left, who simply don't like the message he is delivering. And the message he's delivering is that if the left loves background checks for gun purchases, as they have endorsed them many times, then clearly they must love them for exercising another right, namely the right to vote. So the funniest part of all of this, and this is the part that, as I said, caused me to ask if my deadpan serious academic friend John Lott isn't finally developing an ironic sense of humor. I want you to listen to the objections of the media on the impact of using gun purchase background checks for voting. Now this, by the way, is straight from the mouth of the Washington Post. And I quote, "The most obvious result would be to slow the process of registering to vote." The Post then goes on to cite all of the difficulties in complying with the federal background check requirements that you and I have to go through when buying a gun. Now, understand that in other forums they claim that buying guns is unregulated, but here it's quite a burden, apparently, at least the process to do so. Then, because the National Instant Check system is not 100% reliable, it does go down occasionally. The FBI does pull it off occasionally. The Post notes that hiccups can arise. So apparently those hiccups for you and I in buying a gun, that's just fine. But if those hiccups are applied to registering to vote, that's not acceptable. But that's not all, not even close. Next, the Post laments that background checks would drive away voters. And I quote, "The second most obvious effect of Lott's proposal," says the Post, "would be a reduction in voter rolls." Then we come to my personal favorite. "Another effect?" asked the Post. "A massive amount of bureaucracy." The massive bureaucracy is okay for you and me, but not for, say, the illegal alien who wants to vote. All of these objections, of course, come from a source which has been advocating exactly those same hardships and more, many more, for anyone who has the audacity to want to buy a gun for self-protection. Yes, sir, as we are told by the leftist hypocrites, all of the hurdles being erected to bar lawful citizens from buying guns would be way, way too much trouble for illegal aliens who want to vote. So, I have two proposals. First, of course, we should start advocating John Lott's proposal far and wide in a background checks for voters movement. I think if background checks are reasonable for gun purchases, they should certainly be reasonable for registering to vote. After all, for those who have nothing to hide, what's the problem? Second of all, we must immediately stop using the phrase universal background checks. You know what I'm talking about. Gun control advocates have for years proposed running all gun sales, including private transfers, including gifts, including inheritances, including private transfers, especially at gun shows that they call the so-called gun show loophole. They want to run all of those through the exact same national instant check system that they say would be way too much trouble for voters, that would in fact cause voter disenfranchisement. I want you to remember those words, voter disenfranchisement. So, from now on, whenever you hear calls for universal background checks, I want you to brand the proposals as exactly what they are. Gun buyer disenfranchisement. I want you to tell everybody in earshot that the left has already pronounced these measures as too burdensome to be applied to the right to vote, but they're quite happy to apply them to the right to keep and bear arms. There can only be one motivation for these universal background checks, and that is gun buyer disenfranchisement, preventing people from exercising their constitutionally guaranteed right to keep and bear arms. And that is the way we should describe it from now on. Gun buyer disenfranchisement. Now, on a different topic, an interesting federal gun bill made it out of the House Committee on Natural Resources this week. It is My name is Paul Vallone, and you are listening to Guns, Politics, and Freedom today on Wilmington's Big Talker 106.7, wilmingtonbigtalker.com. In our last segment, we were discussing an interesting federal gun bill that just made it out of the House Committee on Natural Resources this week and could be headed to a floor vote in a Congress near you, or near Washington as the case may be. It is called H.R. 3668, the Sportsman's Heritage and Recreational Enhancement Act of 2017, otherwise known as the SHARE Act. It would remove burdens on federal land to expand opportunities for hunting, fishing, and recreational shooting. And thanks to an amendment by South Carolina Republican Jeff Duncan, the bill would also loosen current restrictions on sound suppressors or silencers. As we said back in 1934, Congress restricted short-barreled rifles, short-barreled shotguns, machine guns, sound suppressors, and destructive devices by imposing what was then a huge tax, a $200 tax, on the transfer of each one of these weapons. Since then, they've begun to impose background checks, fingerprints, and a variety of other restrictions. And in addition, thanks to the McClure-Volkmer Act of 1986, or I should say, an anti-gun amendment by voice vote to the McClure-Volkmer Act, because the McClure-Volkmer Act was otherwise a pro-gun piece of legislation that actually solved some of the problems of the Gun Control Act of 1968. But thanks to a voice vote, It also prohibited the transfer into private hands of any machine gun manufactured after May of 1986. So that previously, although you could get one by simply paying a $200 tax stamp, now the only ones you can get are those made prior to May of 1986, which of course have been snapped up by collectors. And the so-called transferable machine guns have now become extraordinarily expensive. Machine guns are a rich man's sport. The other weapons regulated by the National Firearms Act of 1934, however, still remain quite reasonable. You can own short-barreled shotguns. Short-barreled rifles are quite popular, as are silencers. But the problem is that in order to get one of these sound suppressors or silencers, they can cost as little as $400. I have one myself, but each transfer requires a $200 tax stamp, the federal background check, and typically a wait of many months. Okay, the Bureau of Alcohol, Tobacco, Firearms, and Explosives is not known for being real quick about this stuff. So, Duncan's amendment would make it easier to get sound suppressors. Now, first of all, let's dispel some myths. Nothing can make a gun completely silent. Beyond the explosive sound made by the expanding gases as a bullet leaves the barrel, most bullets make a supersonic crack as they break the sound barrier, meaning most so-called silencers are actually quite audible. Now, I personally have a .22 caliber suppressor, and even at its quietest, namely when I use subsonic ammunition, it makes about the same noise as a pellet gun. Now, when you start talking about high-caliber firearms, sound suppressors or not, they're going to make a significant amount of noise. So get those movie notions of silenced revolvers, which, by the way, can't be done anyways. Silenced revolvers making those little FIP noises, get that notion right out of your head, because that's not what sound suppressors do. Matter of fact, in European countries like Finland, Norway, and elsewhere, it's not any more difficult to get a sound suppressor than it is a firearm. And that is essentially what the SHARE Act would do. It would make it easier for those of us who now shoot to do so with far less risk of hearing loss. And by the way, take that from a many-decade shooter here who is now about half deaf. And so consequently, it would remove the ATF requirement for the $200 tax stamp and essentially regulate a suppressor as a firearm with a serial number, and it would require I would have the same requirements as transferring any other type of firearm in terms of NICS checks and that sort of thing. In itself, that's still kind of ridiculous, but it certainly is an improvement. Now, this bill could very soon move to the United States House floor for a vote. Now, that means the gun control organizations are, of course, screaming bloody murder. Every Town for Gun Safety claims that these will now become the firearms of choice for mass murderers who will run around killing indiscriminately and not making any noise while they do so. In typical fashion, the left uses all manner of disinformation to make their usual claims of mayhem and blood in the streets, none of which ever comes true. When we passed concealed carry here in North Carolina, and every time we've expanded concealed carry since then, we've been told there would be shootings at traffic lights, Wild West scenarios in the streets. When we expanded onto campuses, we were told that college students would be shooting each other at football games. When we expanded into concealed carry into restaurants with on-premises alcohol consumption permits, we were told drunks would be shooting each other at bars. None of this has ever come true, of course, and it will be equally false in this particular case. Now, the political insiders tell us the bill has no chance of clearing the United States Senate, where, of course, the Democrats are expected to filibuster the bill, and unless the Republicans can, I guess, figure out some artifice with the rules, they don't have the 60 votes necessary to overcome the filibuster. I say, let's worry about that when we get to it. Meanwhile, what we need to do right now is to pass this bill out of the House. So let's tell our House representatives to do what we sent them to do. That means you need to contact your congressman and tell him to support H.R. 3668, the SHARE Act, by all means, procedural and substantive. That's right. Call your elected representative to the United States House of Representatives and tell him or her to not only vote for the bill, but to push Republican leadership to get that bill to the House floor for a vote. Now, how can you find your elected representative to the United States House? Well, you can go to our website, which is www.grnc.org, grnc.org. At the top left, you will select Defend Your Rights, and then scroll down to the selection that says Find My Elected Representative, in which we will find U.S. Congress. So again, go to grnc.org, Defend Your Rights, and then Find My Elected Representative, and I want you to contact your representative to the United States House and let them know that they need to support the SHARE Act and to pass this legislation. It's, again, H.R. 3668, the SHARE Act, and supported by all means procedural and substantive. And while we're on the topic of passing legislation, here in North Carolina, we have a bill we've been trying to pass, House Bill 746, Omnibus Gun Changes, which would, among other things, establish permitless concealed carry for North Carolina. It would actually remove the burdens for you to get a concealed handgun permit, providing you want to carry firearms for lawful self-protection. Now, HB 746 duplicates policies successfully implemented in 13 other states. North Carolina would be the 14th state to do so. None of the other 13 have experienced any negative consequences out of permitless concealed carry whatsoever. And what's more, it would leave the permit system intact so that people could have reciprocal concealed carry rights with other states and could also carry in certain sensitive areas, since it would apply only in areas where you may currently carry openly right now. So House Bill 746 passed the House. It's now sitting in the Senate and kind of languishing in the Senate. If we don't pass it pretty soon, by the end of this legislative session, it will be dead. And so, consequently, we need you to contact the leader of the Senate, Senator Phil Berger, who is the President Pro Tem of the Senate, Senator Phil Berger, and call him at 919-733-5708. Again, 919-733-5708. Or you can contact him by email at phil.berger@ncledge.net. phil.berger@ncledge.net. Now, we're going to take a quick break here. You've been listening to Wilmington's Big Talker 106.7, WilmingtonBigTalker.com. I am Paul Vallone, your host for Guns, Politics, and Freedom. After our break, we're going to come back and we're going to take up the topic of zombies. Yes, you heard that right, zombies. So please join us after the break as we resume Guns, Politics, and Freedom. My name is Paul Vallone, and you are listening to Guns, Politics, and Freedom, today on Wilmington's Big Talker, 106.7, WilmingtonBigTalker.com. For this segment of the show, we're going to be talking about the undead, namely zombies. Zombies, you ask? What do zombies have to do with guns, politics, and freedom? Well, the answer is plenty. But first, let me give you some background. I have always been a big fan of post-apocalyptic books and movies. Hell, I think I read Neville Shute's On the Beach at about age 12. And it wasn't long after that I saw Charlton Heston in The Omega Man, and I was hooked. You see, post-apocalyptic movies and books are really about man and his propensities once he's been stripped of all the rules and other civilizing factors that we call society. Now, I'm going to go out on a limb here, but given my topic, I'd say most of my listeners are concerned specifically with Western society as it evolved in Europe and Britain. Now, what happens when all the rules against looting and rape and murder disappear? What will man do to protect his family when those rules are gone? And by the way, if you've never read or watched Cormac McCarthy's The Road, I recommend it as a study in exactly how far a man will go to protect his son. Moreover, the movie is utterly faithful to the book, and it retains this feeling of utter dead silence in a dead world throughout the book. It's phenomenal. But back to zombies. They are the hottest subgenre of the post-apocalyptic flicks. Zombies are everywhere, from The Night of the Living Dead to 28 Days Later to what is probably the biggest zombie blockbuster of them all, namely the series The Walking Dead. I'm sure you're thinking, get real. The lefties are taking over. The world is falling apart. Okay? The North Koreans want to nuke us, and you're talking about zombie movies. Well, hang on for a minute, and I promise you that you will never see zombies quite the same way again. The reason the zombies are so big is that they allow us to say what political correctness forbids us from discussing. Zombie movies actually represent veiled allegories about the producers and the non-producers of our society. More than once, my wife and I looked at each other during a Walking Dead episode and said, "Oh my God, did they really say that? Can they get away with saying that?" Now, for the shooters among us, you probably know that there's an entire shooting sport that's evolved around shooting simulated zombies. Yes, zombie targets, green zombie guns, sometimes with chainsaws attached, by the way. And the last I knew, Hornady was even producing, rather expensive, green certified zombie loads it calls Zombie Max ammunition. Hollow point, by the way. Got to make sure you get those zombies. Don't forget headshots. Now, as I've said, the younger generations are drawn to zombie shooting because they feel the same unease that we older folks do about the direction our society's taken. But they've been so thoroughly indoctrinated in political correctness that they can't allow themselves to say who the zombies actually are. Now, I, on the other hand, know exactly who the zombies are and when they are likely to rise from the dead, and trust me when I say I do not need a green gun to address the problem. Anyway, I recently saw a novel twist on the zombie theme in a small British flick called The Girl with All the Gifts. Now, let me give you a little spoiler alert. Unfortunately, to understand what I'm about to say requires hearing a fair bit of the plot. The movie starts with a rather unusual class of children, all completely restrained and wheeled in wheelchairs to and from classes at gunpoint. As it turns out, the children are in a compound run by humans but surrounded by zombies, and are themselves infected with the fungal infection that's taken over the world, but they're some sort of half-mutant generation, ferociously man-eating but still capable of reason and understanding. At least until they get hungry, when they start sputtering and snarling and chewing their way away across the room, kind of like a liberal when you utter the words Donald Trump. Eventually, of course, the compound is overtaken by zombies, and a few intrepid souls, the zombies always have to take over. If you've ever watched The Walking Dead, they always get the place. So a few intrepid souls strike out to find a safe place, and that includes a few soldiers, the children's teacher, a scientist, I believe her name is Carolyn Caldwell is the scientist. She's kind of important in this, who incidentally, she's been working on a cure to the zombie disease by dissecting the brains of the children one by one. They've sort of been disappearing one by one. And of course, then we have Also getting out of the overrun zombie complex, our star, the darling little half-zombie girl, Melanie. Now, anybody who's seen The Walking Dead can imagine the next scenes as various of the less essential crew are subjected to undeath as they get eaten by zombies. Now, it gets interesting when the team isolates themselves in a leftover sealed laboratory. I guess it's the British equivalent of FEMA. I don't know what that would be. After they first